Never be bullied into silence. Never allow yourself to be made a victim. Accept no one's definition of your life. Define yourself. A powerful quote by the Broadway playwright Harvey Fierstein leads us into the mindset of those who were brave enough to fight back and define themselves. The Compton Cafeteria Riot is a monumental historical event that prompted and fueled future queer political action and activism. I'm shining some light on the Compton Cafeteria Riot because of our global state of current events. That being said, I'm speaking specifically to the uprisings and the movements such as the Black Lives Matter movement. For centuries, marginalized communities have been abused and harassed by police and discriminated against in their own surrounding communities. This is a true story of when enough is simply enough. In my speech, I will give a clearer picture of the social hub and surrounding area of the Compton Cafeteria in San Francisco, California, as well as the events that led up to the riot, while highlighting the relationship between Compton Cafeteria's staff, SFPD, and the LGBTQ plus community, and conclude with the aftermath of that riot. Now, to just give you a clearer picture of what the vibe and culture was like in 1960s, it was a time of sexual, gender, and ethnic minority social movements of civil rights and sexual liberation. Many police officers resisted these movements and the increase of such groups, so they would harass and abuse said communities, specifically talking about today the LGBTQ community and particularly the transgender community. Although LGBTQ community was thriving in numbers in this area, trans people, particularly trans women, were not allowed in openly gay spaces or bars. They were seen as perverts and mentally unwell by the public. They were treated as disposable. Now, the Compton Cafeteria is in the Tenderloin district, and if you are from the Bay Area and have ever explored San Francisco, the Tenderloin has a very rich history. The Tenderloin location of Compton Cafeteria, a cafeteria that was 24 hours a day, was one of the few places that transgender people, especially transgender women, could go and hang out. The temperament and aura of the Compton Cafeteria was best described by a customer member of the trans community who recalls it as something out of Wizard of Oz. It was magical, it was fancy and clean, and it was its own little fairyland. We have put into perspective that many trans people were viewed as disposable, right? So many of them were runaways. Many of them were just owned by their own families, and so they didn't have family. So their family was the transgender community, right? These people that loved them and accepted them and kind of shared similar stories. And so many people in the trans community were discriminated against in the job market, right? And so they're runaways, they have no job experience, they've been owned by their family, they're poor, they're homeless, they're displaced. This led many to prostitution or sex work. And that's kind of where this tension between SFPD and the transgender community kind of come into play. So in the eyes of SFPD, they were trouble for the community because of the work that they were involved in and the work that was available to them, right? The work they would accept, causing tension between police and the trans community. The Tenderloin has a long history of several historic, right, confrontations with police. One of them being from journalism of tourism and cultural change recalls in the evening of August 13th, 1961, 5 years before the riot. 103 gay and lesbian partisans were raided in the Tay Bush Inn, which is a cafe that frequently was visited by gay and lesbian partisans. Okay. Now, Partisan from the film Screaming Queens also kind of talks about not only the tension between police, but as I said before, the surrounding community. And so they also recall in a film that I highly recommend, and that this This riot kind of has more detail in this film than I can give you in this 8-minute speech. Um, Screaming Queens, a QED-sponsored film, states Jehovah Witness would walk down the street with crosses and yell at us and tell us we would burn in hell. So there was backlash from both the police and the surrounding community, kind of stating to them, you're unwanted here. We don't want you here in our community. Now this is the boiling point. This is when it starts getting to the point where it's just enough is enough. We're tired of being discriminated against. We're tired of fighting and the arrest. Now the management and staff of Compton would frequently call the cops when trans women were present, causing them to be harassed and arrested for a crime called, and this is from the NPR article, they call it female impersonation. So basically, a trans woman who is perhaps in the eyes of the community, a man dressing up as a woman, impersonating a female, impersonating a woman. So that's kind of the definition of that. Now, this 24-hour cafe was forced to shut down at midnight due to the rambunctious amounts of fights, and then the fights that were caused by arrests from the police, and the violence that would occur when cops would show up. Okay? At the time, it was illegal to cross-dress, and so this gave cops a reason to raid spaces where trans community was present. Compton Cafe management thought that the presence of the trans community was the main reason why they were losing business, why they were losing customers as well. Until one night when the manager did call the cops once again because a trans woman, a drag queen specifically, in this encounter was called the cops on them. Okay, called the cops on the drag queen. Now, when the officer approached the drag queen threw their coffee on the cop, and this caused like a frenzy. So this caused like the whole cafeteria to erupt. Plates were thrown, food was thrown, and other objects. They busted out windows, and this eventually fled out into the streets of the Tenderloin, and this is where the Compton Cafeteria Riot was birthed. Now, out of this birth was aftermath, right? Or afterbirth. Compton's cafeteria, or cafe, was known as the first uprising against police brutality in the queer community. The riot did not fix all the problems that trans people face daily, but it brought attention to their needs to the city of San Francisco and addressing the transgender community as citizens rather than a problem needed solving. In conclusion, I will leave you with this. What is a legacy but planting seeds in a garden that you never get to see?